This conference will now be recorded.
Good afternoon, all. Let's begin our third session. I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jayashree VK. Dr. Jayashree VK is a professor in the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering in Government Model Engineering, Kochi. She has more than 30 years of teaching experience, out of which 21 years were at Government Model Engineering College. Recently, she got transferred to Model Engineering College. Prior to that, she served as a principal at College of Engineering, Adur, another college under the same management, for 4 years. She has completed her B.Tech from PSG College of Technology, Coimbatore in Electronics and Communication Engineering in the year 1987. She finished her M.Tech from IIT Chennai in Biomedical Engineering in 1998. She was also the best outgoing student of that batch. She got PhD from International School of Photonics, CUSAT, in the year 2009. She was a research guide at Model Engineering College Research Center. She produced 2 PhDs and authored more than 20 papers in international and national journals. She was a data auditor of Government Engineering College Thrissur for the TQIP program and was an external expert member for the evaluation of the project on hydrophone at NP Oil. She chaired sessions in international conferences conducted by CUSAT and also a research person for STTP and FTP conducted by ISP, MEC, St. Albert's College, Kochi, etc. Now, on behalf of Government Model Engineering College, Kochi, let me invite Dr. Jayashree VK to deliver his lecture on biophotonics. Over to you, ma'am.
You see the slide? Hello? Slide shows. Can you see the slide?
No, ma'am. Can you please share the screen?
No, you can see. Yeah, you can see this.
No, ma'am.
I think I can. I've taken share. You see now? See now?
Ma'am, did you share the screen?
Yeah, I've shared the screen. Let me see 1 minute. Is it clear now? You shared the screen. Hello? Hello? Can you see the screen? Hello?
Hello, ma'am. We can't see the screen.
No, you cannot see? Okay. 1 minute. I'll.
Ma'am, it's now visible.
Now visible.
Okay. It's visible?
Yes,
ma'am.
visible. You can proceed. Visible.
Okay. One minute. Slideshow എടുത്തേ. Hello. Hello.
Okay, clearly visible. Okay,
Clearly
visible teacher. Clearly
Okay.
visible teacher. Sound is also okay.
Yeah, okay. Sorry for the disturbance.
It's okay, ma'am. You can continue.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Jayashree VK. I first of all would like to thank the organizers for having given me a chance to deliver a talk in this particular FDP. It's long since I've been into research in this particular area, and biomedical field has always fascinated me. That's why I too work for my PhD also in this particular field. So I thought I'll just share a few of my work also in this particular presentation. So the biophotonics. So the biophotonics is a particular area where light and biology or the life science is coming into picture. So I'll just show a few slides on that particular topic. So what is biophotonics? Biophotonics is a science that investigates the fundamental interactions between light and the biological matter. So we make use of light to make manipulations, to observe or manipulate biological systems. So though we have many other areas where imaging, etc. are possible, light is particularly useful because it is not a harmful thing for use for radiation. So a lot of fields are there. So I will not be able to cover all the fields because it's a big ocean actually. So I just thought I'll limit to a few non-invasive diagnostic methods and one or two therapeutic methods alone. And I think this subject is also there as a part of the MTech program for under CureSat and under the Technological University, APJ Technology University. So biophotonics is an emerging multidisciplinary research area which embraces all light-based technologies applied to the life sciences and medicine. And the expression itself is a combination of the Greek syllables, bios standing for life and phos standing for light. So why should we use biophotonics? So biophotonics is ideally suited to visualize living biological system at the cellular and molecular level. So in case you're able to diagnose the onset of any disease, like it will be very useful because always prevention is better than cure. So this biophotonics area has helped to look at things at the cellular level or the molecular level, and still research is going on to this field. And since nanophotonics is an evolving area, there are a lot of biomaterials which can be used in this particular field of biophotonics. So biophotonics by Wikipedia, the term denotes a combination of biology and photonics, with photonics being the science and technology of generation, manipulation, detection of photons, that is the quantum units of light. And people also make use of the classical usage of biophotonics is also used alternatively as photobionics. So photobionics means where we use a lot of biomaterials which are actually available in nature, or it can be derived from the laboratory. So they're used for making optical devices, whereas biophotonics is the application of optical techniques, particularly imaging, to the study of biological molecules, cells, and tissue. So as I told you, there are a lot of examples in nature where where we can see a lot of applications of biophotonics in our day-to-day life itself. For example, the human vision is a typical example of biophotonics. Then you have the photosynthesis, which takes place in plants. Then the vitamin D synthesis. All these are basically examples of biophotonics, which is very much seen in our nature itself. So the field of biophotonics has, as I told you, a lot of areas. So one area is the bioimaging. You have biosensors, you have microarrays, laser tweezers and scissors, where you can manipulate the tissues. Tissue engineering is an important field. Then you have the photodynamic therapy, where you can therapy is a treatment using light. Then you have non-viral gene therapy, nanomedicine, etc. So these are some of the examples which you can see in our day-to-day life, especially now we are all under the influence of corona-19. The pandemic is there. So as you all must be knowing, one vital parameter that people are looking at for is the saturation of oxygen in the blood. So in case you are like if the virus affects you, actually your blood oxygen level will actually go below it will go to a very low value. And this pulse oximeter is an instrument which is used to measure that particularly. But this is though it's used for measuring the saturation of oxygen in blood, it has also a very valuable application for non-invasive diagnostics, and I have worked on this particular field for my research work. So then the pregnancy test, flow cytometer, these are all typical examples of how light is harnessed in healthcare diagnostics. So these are the this shows you about the harnessing of light for therapy, especially the photodynamic therapy. It is not only the photodynamic therapy. Here actually you don't make use of a diode, LED, but now research is going on where LEDs of different makes are available for therapy also, where you don't have to use lasers. So people are exploring that area also, because the light is a bit harmful. So the need for biophotonics in medicine is especially for optical characterization of a disease. That is, you can differentiate between healthy and disease samples, and the need to work with living systems. As CPG sir rightly pointed out in the morning, in Manipal Institute, the medical sciences, there are doctors who are working on this particular area, and especially the oral cancer. They have done a lot of work in this area, just merely using light. And it is a non-invasive technique. They're using the Raman spectrum. And then tracking or localizing a disease. It's same as the above, but the only thing is the location is unknown here. And the main advantage of using light is it is non-invasive. You don't have to invade the body. And it is minimally invasive imaging is possible. And especially quantum dots and nanoparticles are now available. So you have a lot of applications using them also. Then enabling or improving the treatment of a disease. So you have a lot of applications in that area also. So biophotonics plays an important role in cancer biology and medicine. So we go to bioimaging. So optical bioimaging, it uses an optical contrast such as a difference in light, transmission, reflection of fluorescence between the region to be imaged and the surrounding region. So one important optical imaging, bioimaging modality is the OCT. We call it as the optical coherence tomography. And these are available in some of the hospitals also. Mostly the ophthalmologists use this for like finding out or diagnosing some of the diseases of the eye, etc. And apart from that, you have a lot of imaging modalities, but normally the other modalities all look at largely focus on the structural and the anatomical imaging at the tissue or the organ levels. So your medical imaging techniques like X-ray, radiography, CAT scans, ultrasound, MRI, etc. They all have ionizing radiations. So when you use dense breasts or young patients, these radiations are harmful. So the radioactive, even in radioisotope imaging, there's a harmful radioactivity. And ultrasound also have a resolution limitation. So that's why we go in for optical imaging. So the optical imaging is basically non-harmful, and the size scaling is also very small. It's of the order of 100 nanometers, and we can make use of multi-dimensional imaging using transmission, reflection, and fluorescence. And you can go in for in vitro, in vivo, and ex vivo specimens. So biophotonics plays an important role in detecting the cardiovascular disease also. Like you have the plaques, that is the blockage of arteries is there. So we can even easily detect the plaques using the spectroscopy or any other method. Then infectious disease, people are already working in this particular area. So this is also an non-invasive type of imaging. So in regenerative medicine also we are making use of it, where you can just trap a cell optically, because the light beam has a specifically some momentum, and a cell can be trapped. And we have these laser scissors and things like that, where we can easily intervene directly into a cell. So what are the missions connected with biophotonics research? So mainly it is like understanding life on the cellular level, early diagnosis of diseases, personalized therapies, and preventive healthcare. So when you understand a disease at the molecular level, the life process on the cellular and molecular level, you can, it will indirectly help you to develop novel targeted therapies, because any therapy depends upon proper diagnosis. So if the diagnosis is not correct, your therapy also will not be effective. And early recognition of diseases is the need of the hour, especially when you have diabetes mellitus. Like when you're diabetic, it affects a lot of your organs. So if you're able to understand that a person is going to be diabetic, or if early onset of diabetes is known to you, then you can easily treat the disease at the initial stage itself. Though diabetes does not have a cure, at least you can see that the patient does not have a hyperglycemia or something like that. So all these are directly attributed to biophotonics to a great extent. Then targeted treatment of diseases, because you're using a mostly using non-invasive methods. So it is minimally invasive medicine is used here. So the targeted delivery, the drug delivery can be done at the exact site where you want. Mostly all the optical methods have that advantage. And not only that, preventing diseases. One group in Australia, one of my friend has actually worked on assessing the quality of meat also. So that comes under this fourth point, where you can even work on the pathogens in air, water, and food. So even meat quality, in India we don't have that kind of problems, but abroad people have that particular standards also. So people are working on that area also, in food etc. So biophotonics, the biological the applications of light, you have optical microscopy, then you have bright field microscopy, dark field. I'm not going into the details of this because there are a lot of areas. Then phase contrast microscopy is there. All this is based on either the absorbance in the absorbance of light in the sample, or the scattering. See, mainly when light interacts with matter, there will be mainly three processes, mainly absorption, transmission, scattering. So these are some of the areas where biophotonics plays an important role in clinical diagnostics, therapy, control therapy, etc. These are all the areas where it has been used. Okay, I just thought I will concentrate on mainly the non-invasive methods, and I'm just concentrating on non-invasive blood glucose sensing and non-invasive sensing using the photoplethysmographic signal. And apart from that, one or two work that we did in a lab, that what some of my students had done in the lab outside. So non-invasive blood glucose sensing has become the need of the hour, as I told you earlier, because normally the conventional method is pricking the finger, and that is a tedious process, especially in case where where the patient has to do the testing 3 or 4 times a day. So people are all working on non-invasive blood glucose measurement. So mainly it is the sensing is based on 3 factors. One is the glucose property, the second is the tissue property, and the third one, the latest people have gone to the extent of trying to relate the acetone level in the exhale breath to the amount of glucose in the blood. And studies are still going on, though they are not well established, because this acetone level in the exhale breath actually depends on many other factors also. It is not exclusively based on the amount of glucose in the blood. So I just quickly go through the methods, which are 1 or 2 methods which are available for the first and the second one. The third one is actually under study actually, although they are able to correlate the amount of glucose in the blood to the acetone level in the exhale breath. They are not; these studies are not very well confirmed. So the methods used normally for using the intrinsic properties of glucose is NIR or the MIR. That is the near infrared or the mid infrared absorption spectroscopy, optical polarimeter, and Raman spectroscopy. So the glucose optical absorption coefficient, the optical rotation, and the Raman shift respectively are used in this. So I'll be just touching upon the first and the third method. And the parameters that are sensed when light interacts with glucose are the absorption, the rotation, angle of light, and the Raman signal intensity. So the first method, so the non-invasive glucose sensing techniques, as I told you earlier, these are all non-invasive glucose measurement approaches. So the first and the third method, I'll be talking about NIR, MIR absorption spectroscopy method and the glucose Raman shift method. And based on the properties of tissue and blood, I'll be talking about OCT method. So these are the non-invasive glucose measurement techniques. So based on the properties of tissue and blood, we have a lot of methods. I'm not going into the details of all of them. I just take only one method there. And on the left-hand side, also I'll be just trying to type out techniques which are used. So the transmission absorption spectroscopy. This is a simple schematic showing the process of transmission absorption spectroscopy. So the sample is containing here glucose. So the concentration of the glucose in the solution changes. So what happens is when light is passed through the collimation lens, it reaches the sample. The glucose will absorb the light of that particular wavelength, and we select the light source, the wavelength of the light source, such that that window is specific for the glucose molecule, and we see that the other absorbents in the blood do not absorb at that particular region. So the intensity of light that is reaching the detector is based on the Beer-Lambert's law. I think most of you should be knowing about it. And this is the expression for the Beer-Lambert's law. So the initial light intensity is I naught, and I is the intensity of light at any depth within the absorption medium, and epsilon is the molar extension coefficient. And you can see from the equation that the absorption coefficient mu A, I naught into e raised to minus L into mu A. So that mu A is the product of epsilon and C, and that depends upon the concentration of the absorbing molecules. So as you all know, glucose is expressed in milligrams per deciliter. Schematic of the Raman spectroscopy based transcutaneous blood glucose detection is shown here. So you can see in the figure in the last that there are some peaks seen here, and these are all the peaks owing to the Raman spectra. So there's a scattering here, and it is an inelastic scattering. Most of the scattering in blood will be elastic. And this Raman spectra, actually the Raman scattering is actually pretty weak, but we use suitable optics to collect that. So this is a schematic showing the Raman spectroscopy. So you can see the light source, the collimation lens, and you have a dichroic mirror. So the dichroic mirror and the filter will allow only the Raman spectra to reach the detector, because all the other scatters which are due to Rayleigh scattering and all that will be removed using the filter and the dichroic mirror. So in this case, the Raman scattering, the change in wavelength and frequency between the incident emitted light is due to the interaction of light with the scattering molecules. So normally this Raman shift is actually expressed in units of per centimeter. And in glucose, the Raman fingerprints are normally observed at 911, 1060 and 1125 per centimeter, with the highest intensity Raman signal at 1125 per centimeter. So when all these, the peak height or the intensity of the Raman spectrum is dependent upon the substance concentration and the wavelength of the light source. So there is an intensity, increase in the intensity of the Raman peaks as the incident wavelength is decreased. So the concentration of glucose depends upon the intensity of the Raman spectrum and the wavelength of the light source that is used. So this is the second method which I was talking about. It's based on OCT, or the optical coherence tomography of tissue, and this is based on the tissue properties. So this is nothing but an Michelson's interferometer configuration, where you have a reference mirror and the beam splitter. The light passes through the sample, to the tissue sample. It is reflected back, and at the beam splitter, you can see that there is some interference taking place. So the light source is actually split into two beams. The backscattered light from the tissue sample, and the second beam, which is reflected from a reference mirror, reaches the beam splitter, and there's an interferometric signal that is coming from the tissue sample and the reference mirror. So this particular technique has a high resolution, and normally we make use of a low coherence light source here, and within the NIR range, near infrared range, with a coherence length between 10 and 15 meters. So the OCT signal, the advantage of using the OCT signal is we can measure the signal at a specific depth of the tissue layer, and we can just scan the mirror in the reference arm without any interference. Normally what happens is the reflections from the other tissue layers will also be interfering with the actual area of interest. So if you can scan the mirror in the reference arm, and if you have a second moving mirror into the tissue sample arm, then the probing beam can be moved laterally over the tissue surface. So you get a two-dimensional image in both the lateral and in depth. So that's the main advantage of using the OCT technique, and it also has a high SNR. So even if you're using even if you get a very low light intensity scattered back from the biological tissue, you're able to detect that. So the concentration of glucose increases as the concentration of glucose increases, the refractive index of the extracellular fluid increases. So the tissue scattering coefficient decreases. So the amount of backscattered light that reaches the detector also changes. So this is an acetone level monitoring is studies are still going on. So I just got a recent paper on that. People are still working on that. The problem is acetone levels, as I told you, in diabetic people, though there are higher levels of acetone compared to healthy people, because insulin acts as an inhibitor for ketones production. And diabetic patients, especially you have type 1, type 2, there are 4 types actually. Type 3 is gestational diabetics, and type 4 is because of some other factors in the body. Type 1, normally the people have low insulin levels. So diabetic patients since they have low insulin levels, then this ketones production will not be inhibited, and acetone is one type of ketone. So it has been proved that people who have diabetes have relatively higher levels of acetone in their breath, but there are studies showing that there are other factors also contributing to this particular level of the acetone concentration in the breath. So people are not able to identify whether it is because of only diabetes or other factors are also contributing. Still research is going on in this area. So these are some of the non-invasive devices available, commercial devices available. The main areas from where they have been taking the measurements are done. So normally the measurements are done the fingertip, the wrist, the finger, arm, etc. And one advantage of using this non-invasive method here is all these which I'm going to talk about, all that we can have wearable devices. Whereas invasive methods, it's a cumbersome process. So these non-invasive methods, they can be made into miniature sizes, and they're also, and mostly wearable devices are also being researched upon these days. And a lot of you must be even seeing wristwatches where all your important parameters are being displayed. So all this is possible because of non-invasive methods. So I just quickly go through the light activated therapy, which is called the photodynamic therapy. So photodynamic therapy is actually you kill the cancer cells using light, and mainly it has simultaneous existence of, there should be a light source, there should be a photosensitizer, which is called the PS, and there should be the oxygen species. So it is a reactive oxygen species, which is called the ROS. So the PDT refers to photodynamic action to destroy or modify the tissue. So the photosensitizer actually earlier, I think first generation photosynthesizers, now we are into, I think, the third generation of photosynthesizers. And this drug is actually administered either topically or intravenously to the malignant. And when light is applied, that particular drug absorbs the light and it produces reactive oxygen species that can destroy the tumor. So what happens is when the photosynthesizer is exposed to light of specific wavelength, because different photosynthesizers are available, example is photophorin, and I think 5-ALA is most commonly used. And now people are into one research lab in Australia is working upon they're not even using light, they just moved to X-ray again. They're using X-rays and PDT together. So the photosynthesizers, the third generation normally are all encapsulated forms. That is, nano materials are being used. So when nanomaterials are used, it is easy for you to do targeted, the delivery, drug delivery is easier into the target area. So the photosynthesizer, the ground state, it will undergo intersystem crossing to the microsecond triplet state. So the triplet state oxygen actually interacts with the surrounding molecules. So it can be either type 1 or type 2. So as I've shown in the next diagram, this is how the type 1 and type 2 reaction takes place. So the oxygen here, that's called the ROS, reactive oxygen species, will actually interact with the tissue. If it is the cancerous cell, it acts there and it kills the cells there. So these are some of the photosensing agents which are available. And as I told you, these are all coming under either generation, first generation or second generation. The latest generation makes use of nanoparticles. So mostly it is used for skin cancers, and also different other cancers are also making use of PDT trials. So here actually in this case there's no pain, and even the patient need not be admitted in the hospital for a long time. So that is the advantage of using PDT. Okay, I just touched upon the therapeutic use of light. Now I'll just go into the main area. This is the area where I worked actually, plethysmography. So as all of you know, the heart pumps blood. So there is a contraction and relaxation of the blood muscles. So when the heart pumps, when the heart contracts, heart muscle contracts, blood is ejected into the ventricles, and there's a pressure pulse which is transmitted to the circulatory system. So when this pulse is traveling through the vessels, it reaches anyway the periphery of body. So we have the option for extracting this blood volume pulse from the periphery of the body, and so the volume changes in any part of the body that result from the pulsations of the blood occurring with each heartbeat. That is referred to as the photoplethysmography signal. So the photoplethysmography, plethysmograph is a recording of that, and the blood volume pulse is referred to as the PPG signal. It's called the photoplethysmography signal. So the importance of PPG as a non-invasive method is, as you all know, almost most of us have, we don't have a heart rate to be, there's definitely a variability in most of our heart rate. It is not constant throughout. So that measurement and monitoring of HRV is actually very important for the diagnosis of several cardiovascular diseases, because before you have a stroke or any kind of thing, normally there are a lot of parameters which will change, and if you're able to diagnose that early, you can start the treatment also. So when you use your ECG recording, so normally we take the ECG recording, but the drawback of a ECG recording is either you go for the say lead 1, lead 2 or lead 3 recording, or you make use of the chest leads. So it is a cumbersome process where you will have to apply the electrodes across the chest. Whereas, as I told you earlier, the pulse oximetry probe is a simple clip-like structure where you can just use it on your finger, the earlobe, or any other area where the blood flow can be detected. So these advancements in the non-invasive physiological detection, so miniature of the hardware and the wireless communication are leading to the development of new wearable technologies. So this is how a photoplethysmographic signal will look like. So you have an AC component and a DC component. So the tissue, the bone, the venous blood, etc. will also give rise to a DC component, and that doesn't have much of an information. The AC component actually contributes to the blood volume pulse. So the blood volume pulse here, the AC component is it is just a reflection of what is happening, the mechanical activity of your heart, actually, the pumping of the blood. So the PPG actually works on, again, the modified Beer-Lambert's law. Blood, as you know, is a highly scattering medium. So we just modify the Beer-Lambert's law. So instead of having I naught e raised to minus mu a, we add an additional factor depending on the measurement geometry and the scattering coefficient of the tissue interrogated. So for the blood, there is a slight modification. One additional term is there. So the typical PPG waveform will look like this. And this waveform you can see in the pulse oximetry also. This is the recording you get from the pulse oximeter. So you have a systolic component and a diastolic component, and you can see that there is a notch there. It's called the dicrotic notch. So it's a summation of the systolic component and the diastolic components is the blood volume pulse. So the dicrotic notch, like that notch will not be seen for all of them, because we have done the recordings for a lot of people, and it is actually related to age, and in case of any disease, all that, the blood volume pulse shape itself is likely to change. So the PPG signal is normally picked up from the finger or the earlobe, mainly from the finger. And you have two modalities here. Either it is the transmission mode or the reflection mode, as shown in the diagram. Transmission mode, they are placed on either side of the finger, whereas the detector and the light source are placed on the same side of the finger in case of reflection mode. So the age-related studies that were conducted, some of the studies we had made in the lab actually. So as your blood vessel, so owing to aging, the objective assessment of vascular aging is important because your arteries become stiff. So the stiffness of the arteries is actually associated with hypertension, and that hypertension is a risk factor for stroke and heart disease. So the elastic properties of the vascular system will change with respect to age. So it is an if it depends only on age and not any other factor, it is an independent predictor of your cardiovascular mortality. And the pulse wave velocity, also depends to a certain extent of the small arteries, depends upon the tone of the arteries, that is the elastic nature of the arteries. So that also gives a measure of the condition of the heart and the arteries. And especially diabetic patients, so diabetes affects the eye, that is the diabetic retinopathy is there, the neuropathy is there. So it affects the vasculature also. So we can even study that by just picking up the PPG signal. So there is an this is an blood volume pulse recorded by measuring the transmission of IR through the finger pulse. And the blood volume pulse, as you can see, there is an delta T BVP shown there, and that is the delay actually between the systolic component and the diastolic component. So in order to study about these pulses and the other parameters, we take a recording for almost 10 seconds of the PPG data, and from that we get a mean pulse function. And then we take the measured pulses and optimize it for the contrast similarity in order to minimize the effects of motion and damping normally present in such data, because motion artifact is also another factor, because if the patient moves also your recording will get disturbed, like ECG itself. So the patient has to be in a that is the arm should be placed at almost the level of the heart and very stable, only then you get a good recording. So the normalization of the mean pulse was done for overall shape assessment to get rid of variability due to heart rate differences, because you're taking the recording for 10 seconds and then getting a mean pulse function. So from that you can determine the delta T BVP value. So for determining that, the peaks, the systolic peak and diastolic peak can be determined using the derivative of the mean pulse function. So this is a recording that we did in the lab actually. What is shown on the right hand side. So is this clear? Diagram is clear? Hello? Diagram is clear?
Yes, miss.
Okay, so in the right hand side, because the background is pink, I thought, so the right hand side, the signal that you can see, which has a perfect notch, is for an patient who is only candidate who is just 21 years. And the one on top is actually for age 35 years, and the middle one is for age 55 years. So you can see that the PPG signal is clearly dependent on age. So the dichrotic notch is very prominent for a candidate who is of a lesser age compared to the others. So these are some of the parameters or age-rated indexes that we studied in the lab. Actually, the recording was done, and all these were actually recorded. The signals were recorded, and these parameters were studied, and all this had a specific relation to age. So what we notice is, as age increases, the dichrotic notch is less pronounced, and that is because the reflected wave, which is augmenting the forward wave, the systolic component, diastolic component, the diastolic component actually comes faster. So the forward wave is augmented by the reflected wave, and PPG will become more and more rounded with age. That is because the arteries are becoming more and more stiff, and the stiffness index will increase. And another study that we could do is using the second derivative of the PPG signal. It is called the SD-PPG. And when you take the second derivative of PPG, there are a lot of components you can see there, A, B, C, D, E. So that A, B, C, D waves are for the systolic waves, and the E is for the diastolic. So any minute change that is coming in the phase of the inflections can be detected here using the second derivative. So we just try to record the signals from diabetic people, the patients having diabetic retinopathy. So in this case, actually, whenever there is a retinopathy, actually your autonomic nervous system is affected. Autonomic, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic system. So when your autonomic nervous system is affected, what happens is, suppose you're not diabetic, then your left and the right recordings of PPG signal will show clear bilateral symmetry. But when during the onset or when the disease is aggravated, then you can see that the bilateral symmetry is no longer there, and that will help in detecting the inadequacy of the sympathetic nervous system. So you can get the correlation coefficients between the right and the left recordings. So we just made a study on that. That is called the bilateral symmetric study, and to show that it is dependent only on the symmetry, we should prove that it is independent of age, because if it depends on age also, then it is not an index for comparing normal subjects with those affected with diabetic retinopathy. So for this, we actually took the ratio of B is to A also, and studied that. Then we used a statistical signal processing approach for that to show that diabetics lack bilateral symmetry. So this bilateral symmetry is not there in the case of diabetics because the peripheral circulation is not proper. So instead of having sequential measurements, that is normally for right and left, each time instead of taking measurements, you can do simultaneously recordings from the right and the left side, and show that it is independent of age and the heart rate. So this is the system that we used. So the PPG acquisition unit was developed in-house, and the system, both the recording channels were identical in all respects. So two reflection mode PPG pulse probes were used, and the signal was recorded using a DPO. So all the two channels were identical in all respects, because if they are not identical, then if suppose the gain of one of the amplifiers changes also, we can say that there is no symmetry. So all this was taken into consideration before the recording. So this is a setup that we used, and the recording of the signals was done in one of the eye hospitals here in Vaitla. So where we could get the signals from a few patients with diabetic retinopathy. So these are the recordings, and you can see that the red and the blue, they are from the two different channels, and in case there's a bilateral symmetry, both of them will be very identical. So for a diabetic, same age, because we've shown that it's not dependent on age. So for the same age, actually, we could see that the PPG signal, the mean pulse was almost rounded for a diabetic, whereas for a non-diabetic, actually, the signal had a dichrotic notch. So the right-left correlation coefficient versus the age here shows that the red one is diabetic, and the black dots there show the non-diabetic. So most of the non-diabetics are on the upper side, which means that the right and left side are they're almost identical. The recordings are almost identical, and these are the autocorrelation functions corresponding to the right and the left hand signal of a healthy person. And for a diabetic patient, it looks like this. It is different because the bilateral symmetry is not there. And another study that could be done non-invasively, people are working on this actually, the gastric motility, that is the stomach. The gastric motility is an important factor these days because most of them have the syndrome, I think. So in case you have stomach ulcer or something like that, it is difficult for you to take the electrogastrogram, that is called the EGG, and the GMA, the gastric motility, the graph is normally obtained from the EGG. When people are trying to extract this from the PPG signal. So in case there is a gastric pathology. So the peripheral blood flow dynamics, which you pick up from the periphery, that is like a fingertip or whatever it is, it has some relation to the blood supply to the smooth muscles of the blood also during digestion. And that signal is only of very low frequency signal of the order of 0.04 to 0.1 hertz. And both these signals are usually non-stationary. So people have worked on this by making use of wavelet transforms. So depending upon the transformation level of the level that you use, you get details and the approximations. So the details can be normally removed because that will be due to the patient movement, that's the motion artifact, and the approximations can be obtained to reconstruct the GMA. So people have worked on this, and this is the recording of the finger PPG and the EGG signal in fasting state. And this wave has been constructed from the 10th level approximation coefficients in the postprandial state using the wavelet transform. So from the PPG signal, the EGG signal was reconstructed. So there is another opportunity for non-invasive monitoring of the PPG signal, that is the GMA signal using the PPG signal. So another promising area is the using the fluorescence analysis for non-invasive diagnostic of multiple cancers. This was actually done in one of the labs in Cochin itself. That is, some of our students worked on this particular area, that is using the fluorescence to identify the different stages of cancer. So whenever there is a carcinogenesis, it produces alterations at the tissue level, which are reflected normally in the fluorescence spectra. So in case there is the fluorescence peak is at a particular wavelength, it might help in finding out if there's any pre-malignancy. So for the cancers like oral cancer or cervical cancer, whatever it is, the excitation, the absorption will be at a particular wavelength. So that wavelength, if we use a light at that particular wavelength, excitation, then you can induce characteristic fluorescence emission in the tissues. And that light can be, the fluorescence can be analyzed to find out the malignancy. So the project was done for oral and cervical cancer detection actually. So the oral cancer 404 nanometer excitation yielded characteristic fluorescence at 500 nanometer, and with additional peaks in the red region for malignant tissues. And the intensity of the peaks will vary with the malignancy. And in cervical also, the excitation was at 380 nanometer and 460 nanometer, and emission and the fluorescence was at a longer wavelength. So the light intensity normally from the abnormal tissue will be less than that of the normal tissue. So this is the block diagram for the oral cancer detection. So this was done in one of the labs here in Cochin, and using the block diagram here, we are able to get the peaks for a particular malignancy using the fluorescence detected. So this is another area where you can non-invasively detect. It's a diagnostic approach actually, where you can detect the cancer actually. And the same way actually Manipal Hospital is also working for oral cancer, but that is based on the Raman spectra. Another work that one of our students attempted was devising and trying to make a non-invasive bilirubinometer for pediatric application. As you all know, when at birth, normally all the infants, infants, they have this concentration variation of bilirubin, and that yellow color is there. So if you can actually detect this non-invasively, it will be of great help. So this principle is based on diffuse reflectance spectroscopy. So this was the block diagram used for finding out the concentration of bilirubin. So the equation is available for that, and from this particular equation, you get the optical density of the total, and from there you can find out the optical, because skin you have when you use a laser light, whatever it is, you have the optical density of the total medium. From there you'll have to subtract the melanin pigments and the hemoglobin, and then you get the bilirubin, because the absorption is there for all of them, all the three of them. So before I conclude, I just wanted to tell you about the latest research in this area. It's the nanotechnology, where you have the quantum dots, all nanoparticles are used, gold nanoparticles, etc. are used. So here, when you use nanotechnology, the main advantage is you have the controlled release of the drug there, and the target drug targeting is very efficient there, and it reaches exactly at that particular spot where the cancer cells have to be destroyed. And lot of multimodality and the multiplexing is also possible using this nanotechnology. People are working in this area. As I told you, even PDT is actually now moving into the third generation, where the photosynthesizers used are now nanoparticles. So nanomedicine has a lot of applications. So the last one marked as theranostics. So that is see and treat. That is a new area. Actually, theranostics is a medical field which combines the diagnostic and therapeutic capabilities into one nano platform. That is, your nanoparticles will carry both the anti-cancer agents and the imaging probes together, such as MRI. Suppose the contrast agents have to be there to the tumors, or they could simultaneously deliver multiple therapeutic agents. That is, you can use PDT along with chemotherapy. So all that has become possible because of nanomedicine. So this is this is the vision for our future health, personalized medicine, and multimodal modalities can be, that is, you can incorporate multimodalities here, and for implementing an effective and safe targeted therapy. So I think with this I can stop now. If you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Now let's move on to the
Yeah,
questionnaire session.
Yeah, I've just covered very few topics because this area is very vast.
Okay, ma'am. If you have any doubts, if the participants have any doubts regarding the topic, just note them in the chat box. Then I will ask one by one to the speaker. Okay, ma'am. One of the participant, Faisa K, has asked one question.
Okay.
Which PPG
Okay.
mode is more effective, transmission or reflection mode?
Yeah, it is. Both are equally effective. The only thing is, most of us make use of reflective mode because transmission mode is quite difficult. Because you got to place them on either side. Reflective mode, actually, you can just strap both of them. You can do it either way, but most of us make use of reflective mode only. It doesn't matter because the wavelength that you are selecting of the source. Okay. That the source, the wavelength that you use is dependent on the output signal that you get will depend on the light source that you're going to use, because there are a lot of absorbers in the blood medium, so you have to select the wavelength region in that area. But transmission mode normally people don't use because it is difficult to strap them. Most of them are reflective mode. Anything,
Okay, ma'am.
anyway, it's possible. You get the same signal. It is not a problem because we used both. Because we made it in the form of a clip actually. You can make it in the form of a clip or a Velcro strap. The module also is possible. Anyway, you can do.
Okay, I think the doubt is clear to Faisa K. The next question is by Aswat. Whether the spectrometer you have used based on CCD.
Spectrometer we used because it is not used in the college lab. It was used outside. It was used in the Nest laboratories. So I'm not very sure what type was used there. It was not in-house actually. The project was done outside. I don't think it is a CCD.
Okay, ma'am. I think the doubt is clear. The next question is by Pankaj Kesari. What types of lasers used for biophotonics application?
Biophotonics application, we make use of lots of semiconductor laser diodes are used, different lasers are used because depends upon the application. It's not specific. You don't use a single laser. You use different types of laser. Even carbon dioxide laser is used. Different types of lasers are used. Depends on the application that you're using. But now people are moving into LEDs because LEDs, the controlling of light and all that, a lot of research is going on in that area. People have been able to use that for therapy also now. So latest, I think 2019, one paper has come where LED is being used for even a lot of applications like treating psoriasis, then osteoporosis, a lot of applications. No, the question is not very specific because lasers, different types of lasers are used here. It depends on the application where which wavelength you need.
Okay, ma'am. I hope the doubt is clear for Pankaj Kesari. The next question is by Suraj Ravindran. How do we ensure that the light absorbed in laser therapy damages only cancerous cells?
No, that is why I said we have to go for targeted delivery. So the targeted definitely there will be some necrosis of the cells in surrounding also. It's not possible to do it. So that's why people are working on nano particles now. Nano photonics is the area of research where targeted delivery is possible. Because when you use laser light, whatever be it, the beam waste will be there definitely. So you cannot have a point source there. Some amount of, see, mostly it is through the delivery of light and all that is now, you can see that actually the endoscopy and all that is available now. So whatever it is, the treatment actually starts, we have a planning for all that, and what is the dosage that is to be given, all that, there is a treatment planning for all this. It is not done in one day. It takes a lot of time. The treatment planning is done. The contour area has to be located first of all, and there is a I think there's a big chapter on that itself. So the contouring has to be done.
Okay, ma'am. I think the doubt is clear to Suraj. Next question is by Anita. Is PPG signals or SPG signals? Which one is better?
What do you mean by SPG? I don't know what she's meant. What is SPG?
Anita, can you
SPP?
mention the full form of SPG in the chat box? It's speckle.
No, I was not talking about speckle here. There's in PPG signal you don't have speckle as such.
Okay.
There's no speckle as such here. So that's why I told you the wavelength, the window that you're using is very important here for picking up the PPG signal. There is no speckle here. If there is a speckle, that will be a noise. But in PPG recording, the main noise is because of motion artifact.
Okay, I think it is clear to Anita. Next question is by Pankaj Kesari. How skin depth of tissues changes with the laser wavelength?
Skin depth of tissues. Question is not clear. I'm not able to get the question. Skin depth of tissues.
Yes, skin depth of tissues changes with the laser wavelength.
No, the question is not clear. I don't know. I'm
Can you,
not getting any sense out of that question. I don't
okay,
know what he
Pankaj
meant
Kesari,
actually.
can you please convey the correct question in the chat box?
No, I think he would have wanted to ask like how the wavelength of the laser that is used, like how we select the laser wavelength for a particular application.
If the
Because
participant wish to interact with the speaker, you can interact with her.
you can directly talk to me. The question is not
Oh,
clear. That's why I just want to get it clarified.
okay. There
Now
is
the
no
question,
response.
no, if the question is like this, I would like to answer like, say it depends upon what are the constituents there at a different layer level. Because the skin, when you take the stratum corneum, actually below that you have a lot of layers and there are a lot of constituents there. So the interstitial fluid, everything is a factor here, because when you do even non-invasive glucose monitoring, you just cannot do it without making a study, because there are a lot of layers in between and there are a lot of absorbing and scattering mediums in between. So the wavelength of light that you use is very important here. Because there will be a lot of constituents that have absorbance in a particular wavelength region, they might scatter in a particular region. So whatever is the region of interest for your particular constituent, say suppose you want to do glucose monitoring alone, so you should see how you can get devoid of all the other constituents. So that particular window should be chosen. Lot of studies are there, and only based on that you can do all this monitoring. Even for the PPG signal, actually we have a diagram for that. I couldn't add that because already I thought I'll run short of time, that's why. So all these windows are actually available for all the type of recordings you make or the non-invasive monitoring that you do.
Okay, I think all the doubts are clear. It's a time to wind up the session. I thank this opportunity to thank Dr. Jayashree VK. Thank you, Miss, for an excellent presentation. Your years of research, your ability to present the subject in such an interesting manner is really appreciable. I would like to thank you on behalf of all the members present here. I hope you all enjoyed her presentation. Thank you so much for your interest and attention. Our next session, as per schedule, will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. and I hope all of you will join. And this brings to an end of today's sessions. Thank you all.